Gabriel Garcia Marquez was born on the 6th of March 1927 in Aracataca, a Colombian village in the heart of the Caribbean. He spent his childhood with his maternal grandparents. His grandmother, Abuela Mina, told him superstitious and magic stories. His grandfather, Colonel Nicolás Ricardo Márquez Mejía, a veteran of the Thousand Days War, on the other hand, told him about the war and the horrors of the world. Gabriel wanted to be like his grandfather, a self-confident, courageous, realistic man, but he could not and was instead driven towards his grandmother's supernatural universe. His passion for literature emerged when he moved to the capital, Bogotá, to attend high school. His literary influences are many, but one of the books that influenced him the most was The Metamorphoses by Franz Kafka. His extra-literary influences are perhaps even more important in analyzing his work. The places of his childhood are equally crucial. For example, Aracataca was the inspiration for Macondo, the famous village of his books. After having abandoned his law studies, he moved to Cartagena, where he began working initially as an editor and later as a reporter for various newspapers, such as El Universal or El Heraldo. In 1955, he published his first novel, Dead Leaves, which, despite the fact that it was considered a commercial failure, marked the beginning of his career as a writer. In fact, he will continue writing until the end of his days, reaching the peak of his success with the publication of his masterpiece, 100 Years of Solitude, in 1967. Here, Gabo takes us with him on a journey to Macondo, a remote but happy Colombian village. A family, founder of the village and protagonist of the story, welcomes us into their home where extravagant and magical events happen every day, and where much confusion is caused by the names of the father, son, uncles, and cousins, which are always the same generation after generation. The plot is confused, and what holds the story together and is relevant are rather specific events, which do not always correspond to the supernatural events that give it the status of a magical realist work. From a stylistic point of view, the work is not very significant. It is characterized by the parataxis and absence of paragraphs. Gabriel Garcia Marquez tells us extraordinary events with a simplicity worthy of a children's fairy tale. He does so by getting directly to the point, by presenting us with the fact and leaving us alone with it, without giving us unnecessary explanations. The plague of insomnia, the rain that lasts 4 years without ever stopping, a week in which it is always Monday, the magic realism is intrinsic in the minds of the characters, from Colonel Aureliano Buendia to Mauricio Babilonia, chased by yellow butterflies. There are many supernatural events, but in my opinion, one really enters into the magical realist spirit towards the second half of the novel, when the world of the living and the world of the dead begin to overlap, eliminating all boundaries. 100 Years of Solitude is the most important work of magic realism, a modern literary and artistic movement that developed in the mid-20th century. Magic realism is positioned in that small strip of the world where magic and wonder are reality itself. Realism and naturalness merge with the fantastic and supernatural, but they do not do so through stylistic techniques or turns of phrase. They do so naturally, because behind every reality, even the saddest and harshest, there is a shred of magic and wonder. The first to call this way of making art magic realism was the German historian, art critic and photographer Franz Pro in 1925. After him, other authors such as Alejo Carpentier approached the genre. The binomial used to describe this literary genre is nothing more than an oxymoron, fully reflecting the coexistence of 2 points of view that dominated Latin American culture in those days. On the one hand, the culture of technology, typically Western, and on the other, that of superstitions, myths, and legends, historically indigenous. The genre was born out of this cultural contrast, these very different visions of the world. Europe still represents the world of rationality, truth, realism, and although magic realism is nothing more than a transposition of true and real events in Latin America, it is always classified on the supernatural and superstitious level, implying that the Latin American world cannot be considered rational and no truth can develop from it. Magic realism is not only a celebration of Latin American world and its diversity, but is also in many cases a social denunciation. The dark and grim world of technological progress is devoid of the exotic colors of the Caribbean and therefore fails to grasp the magic behind things. Magic realism belongs to those who have been denied power to the rural, everyday world of indigenous and non-European cultures.